Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what I hope will be the first annual Conference of Miletus. Thank you to Bob for your words of encouragement and for the opportunity to talk here today about what is good, true, and beautiful. For anyone who does not know me, my name is Winston Brady, and I'm the Director of Curriculum in Thales Press here at Thales Academy. This is my 12th year teaching, and during that 12 years, I've taught junior high and high school pretty much everything. History, trivium, and literature, and every so often I teach a Latin class. As Matt said, our mission statement is to cultivate excellent people through the pursuit of truth, beauty, and goodness. And hence this conference with its 3 talks, one on truth, one on goodness, and one on beauty, and how these ideas relate to the good and noble task of classical education. I am tasked with describing and explaining things that are true, what makes them true, and what we can do as teachers in light of what is true. As far as examining the idea of truth, I've divided my talk into 3 points organized around 3 questions. 1, what if there is no truth? 2, how do we know what's true? And 3, how should we teach what's true? So first question, what if there is no truth? Well, I can answer that with a metaphor because, well, you may not see it, you may not recognize it, but yawning beneath our feet, even at this very moment, is a pit of cultural nihilism, an abyss whose mouth is growing ever wider and whose darkness looks ever more appealing to the students standing at the edge of it, peering into it and wondering, should I jump in? That pit of nihilism is the lamentable but logical endpoint for students who have inherited a world without truth, or at least a world in which a greater and greater percentage of its members of previous generations have embraced the idea that there is no truth. Because the one thing that the modern world knows to be true is that there is no truth. Instead, what is true is what is subjective. That is subject to each individual person's interpretation of reality. What is true is what is relative to that person's experience and background, truth being bound up, as it were, in their childhood and their genetic makeup. And what is true is only what works. That's the definition that the modern world has for what is true. It's called pragmatism, and the pragmatist theory of truth states that truth is what works. Thus, what's true for me works for me, and so it doesn't really matter if it's true for you or not, because there may be other ideas and values that work for you. But when we say that there is no truth, we imply that nothing really matters. That is, there's nothing that lies beyond or goes above or transcends individual human experience. And if students operate under this assumption, what will they become? And hence, the generation from which our students are coming from have embraced as their utmost goal, their greatest good, their sunum bonum. It's literally to become a vlogger or a YouTube influencer, which, according to a poll conducted by the Harris Group and LEGO, found that this is the top career goal for kids today. It surpassed astronauts. That is, they want to be famous for doing exactly what they're doing already, probably what they're doing right now, as I'm speaking, spending time on their phones. So here we are, a world without truth, a pit of nihilism with everyone glued to their screens. In some way, shape, or form, we are here today because we recognize that this is not a good outcome for students. Such a world is ultimately unlivable. We're here on this stage to encourage each and every one of you here that there is a better way where we can rescue students from the pit of cultural and academic nihilism by directing their attention to things that are true, good, and beautiful. But of course, how do we know what's true? Indeed, what is truth? Good question. You know, Pontius Pilate, governor of Judea, posed the same question to Jesus at his trial. What is truth? What makes a statement true? A person honest, a value real, or an idea meaningful? The classical definition states that truth is what is real, or what corresponds to reality. This idea is called the correspondence theory of truth, and it's an idea derived from Aristotle's metaphysics. It's an idea that bears great resemblance to our Thales outcome of a truth seeker and a critical thinker, both of which prize a rigorous process of investigation to ensure that ideas that we have in our mind do actually correspond to reality. But of course, some ideas are easier to see if they do correspond to reality. Some ideas can be tested just by looking out the window, some by the methods of empirical science, and others by mathematical reasoning. And of course, science and math carry the incredible power to convey truth, a means that is no less beautiful than a poem or a painting, despite being cast in the language of numbers and algorithms and data. But these means do not necessarily work for questions of value or how we should live. The scientific method, for all its power, can't give us an ought or a should, but only what is, right? The world as it is. So what about questions of value? Ideas like truth, beauty, goodness, justice, fairness. Questions of value pertain to how we should live our lives and make our choices, since what we value and what we believe will necessarily influence how we should live. Questions of value do not necessarily correspond to reality in the same way a statement like 2 + 2 = 4 does. Instead, an argument like such and such a thing is good and that this other thing is bad requires nuanced argumentation and persuasion to support it. And we've all been there, telling a student that this is good or that this is true and that they should make better choices in light of what we are recommending, only to have the student argue with us, which they're all too eager to do. If we tell students that objects fall down, they will necessarily argue that objects fall up if they want them to. Moral and absolute truths, cheating is bad, stealing is wrong, are true in the same way that the law of gravity is true. We just can't prove such truths in the same way we might prove the laws of physics. But of course, this is what we're here to do as teachers. We are here not only to convey information, but also to mold character for the better. And part of that molding comes in how we model the joy that comes from pondering ideas that do correspond to reality, ideas that are real, ideas that actually matter, all of which require that we believe that truth is real and reject the notion that there is no truth, or at least operate on this as an assumption. Such an approach is rooted in no less an example than Socrates. You see, Socrates was obsessed with knowing what an idea like truth and beauty were in themselves. He believed that a person could become a better and more just individual if he just knew more about justice. Throughout Plato's dialogues, though, he never really comes to a distinct formulation concerning these questions of value. He recognized that he could not comprehend truth in its fullness, but he had the conviction that truth is what is real and that truth exists. We all, of course, have the same problem. Our intellect is limited, and thus we can't comprehend the truth in its fullness either. So where do we go from here? The great thinkers of the ancient and medieval world kept asking these same questions, and the worldview of Christianity imparted a deep and meaningful answer to them. To scholars like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, that understanding came not from the content of the answers, but from the character of the person who gave them. Ideas of truth, beauty, and goodness were all wrapped up in the medieval consensus in the character of God, who made the world and everything in it, who created human beings in his own image, and who gave meaningful answers as to what makes life worth living. And that consensus held together the Western world for 1,000 years until dinosaurs. The Lisbon earthquake. Until we figured out what the earth may have actually looked like, learned about alternative accounts to Noah's Ark and the flood. We read about Darwin's voyage on the Beagle. We heard Marx's call for a worldwide workers' revolution. We uncovered the genealogy of morals from Friedrich Nietzsche, and we began to implement John Dewey's educational reforms, who insidiously inserted 3 of the 4 horsemen of modernity into K-12 classrooms. And then there was nominalism, skepticism, deism, colonialism, plantation slavery, the American Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Holodomor, the Holocaust, multiplying instances of genocide, man-made famines, and the threat of nuclear annihilation the world over, which we still live under today. In the past 400 years, we've had an equal mix of scientific discoveries that shattered everything that man once thought to be true about the world, in and alongside horrifying displays of human evil and human suffering that would lead anyone to question that the world has any meaning at all, that truth is what is real, that God can be trusted. So how do we know what's true? I personally hold to that consensus that truth is what is real, and that truth derives from a good God creating a good world filled with good people, capable of doing good things. But for many people, such ideas just seem to no longer work. Because if truth is what works, then the modern world needs ideas that actually work, supposedly. Ideas that can improve our material flourishing. That's where the modern world is, but that's not where we are. The classical renewal movement is about bringing back the consensus that truth is what is real. The desire for truth is deeply embedded in the human condition. Our faculties were not made for sheer survival, but to pursue virtue and knowledge. In the same manner, Socrates contemplated the nature of goodness in hopes of cultivating better character for himself. And as Socrates discovered, though, human understanding is limited and unable to comprehend the truth in its fullness. So where does that leave us? Well, I would want you to consider 4 principles that have long simmered beneath the surface of our school culture, ideas and values we share with other like-minded classical schools, and which project the vision that the administrative team has for Thales Academy. Such principles include natural order, an order that is both beautiful and rational; human dignity, a dignity derived from being created in God's image; and moral philosophy, as rooted in the Judeo-Christian and Aristotelian tradition. Now, these 3 ideas in particular are not commands to bind your conscience in any way, shape, or form, things that you have to believe. Such an approach would be antithetical to the sublime nature of truth. But if you do believe that these ideas are real, then act upon them. Make choices in light of them, and let your teaching reflect the order we see in the world and the goodness of which we human beings are capable. If you don't believe that these values are true, well, I hope I persuaded you in the slightest that there is such a thing as truth, and that we would be happier if we operated under the assumption, the conviction that truth is what is real. But lastly, our intellectual inheritance. That intellectual inheritance is where the truth and our curriculum meet. Just like the 3 roads of grammar, logic, and rhetoric come together in the medieval trivium. Recall that our understanding is limited, and we can't grasp the truth in its fullness. Instead, we see through a lens dimly, without the ability to comprehend the whole. There is that famous anecdote about a group of blind men asked to describe an elephant. Since they're blind, they can't see the whole of the elephant, and say instead that an elephant is like a snake or a column or a wool. Well, this anecdote is usually used to support relativism. We can turn it on its head, because the trick to this analogy is that there is someone who can see and can help interpret the pieces of the elephant in light of the whole. We are not like the blind men, but the sage helping each blind man understand the part of what they are experiencing in light of the whole. And that's what we get to do each day, finding the truest, most beautiful idea or concept and helping our students discover the significance of that idea for themselves, as appropriate to the subject, as appropriate to the age level, as appropriate to the needs of our students. If you're a math teacher, you can showcase how truth can be conveyed in a beautiful way through numbers and algorithms and equations. If science, how orderly and harmonious the world really is. And if a humanities teacher, the consequences for good or ill of an idea when that idea was carried out in a real historical time and place, examined in the plot lines of a book, or portrayed thematically in a painting or sculpture. The truth is, we want truth because a world without truth is ultimately unlivable. Our actions become aimless, and we have to contend against the strong imposing their version of the truth upon the weak. One can think of 2 + 2 = 5, the famous test of obedience from George Orwell's 1984. Remember, as teachers, we convey information, we mold character, and we model what it is like to delight in the discovery of new ideas, all of which require and reject the idea that there is no truth. So in conclusion, if our students have already jumped into that pit of academic and cultural nihilism, or perhaps they're just contemplating doing so, remember that we're the ones holding on to the rope and pulling them back up, reminding them that life has meaning, that the world has an order, and that truth is what is real. As classical educators, we're asked every day to pour into the lives of students, to fill their minds and their hearts with good things, and help them achieve their fullest potential, whatever that may look like. Such is, after all, the goal of classical education, to take students through the great books so that our students can take on the whole world. And with that, I conclude my time and my talk on the nature and beauty of truth. Thank you all very much for your time and for coming out here to our Rollsville campus, as well as for your dedication to our students. I look forward to working with each and every one of you through this year and assisting you in this good and noble task of classical education.